Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt. I gotta say, people, when you introduce yourself and you greet me on the show, you are cheerful. You're happy to see me. That comes through. But when we talk on the phone, that's not, you don't agree with hello, Bill. You do your what's happening. Hey.
Yes. Well, I didn't know you knew where that was from.
Oh, it's like you don't know me. How many years we've been doing this? I think you should start the DMZ with a hey. That'd be a better catchphrase.
Hey. How's it going, Rerun? I guess no wait. Rerun said that.
I mean,
so
I'm older than you. I'm surprised you know what's happening. I'm the one who should be. I'm the one who should be dating myself in the late '70s, early '80s.
What's up, Raj? No, I watched all those shows, and D was on that show. No, I watched Give Me a Break, Good Times, you name it. If it's 70s, 80s, I know the TV. I know nothing about modern pop culture, but anything from the 70s and 80s, right up my alley.
Forgive me if I'm repeating myself. I don't think I've mentioned this on this show, but my older daughter, who's 8, she's definitely, I think, building an interest in comedy. She's always asking, why is this funny? Why is that funny? I think she just kind of wants to know. And I'm trying to think, what can I show her that's great comedy that's age appropriate? Because that gets harder. I rewatched Eddie Murphy's Delirious. Nope, that's not gonna fly. Blazing Saddles. Nope, that's gonna be very hard to explain. That's not gonna work.
Yeah. Actually, I couldn't show an adult that movie today.
Right.
It's politically incorrect.
So, Hulu just a few weeks ago put the entire catalog of Perfect Strangers.
Oh yeah,
online.
Underrated show.
An underrated show.
Yeah.
And because it's mostly physical comedy, it's pretty timeless. There's not a whole. I mean, even with things that seem very innocuous, I find there are things that come across very gendered that I really don't want to show to my kids. But there's not a whole lot of that in Perfect Strangers. I mean, it's not completely free of it, but not much. And it's got a laugh track, which a lot of shows they don't have. So she sees the action, she hears the laughter, she can kind of put two and two together.
And I used to watch that. I mean, I used to watch that show every week.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen it in 30 years because I don't think it ever was really in syndication. At least I didn't see it.
I don't remember. But she loves it. I mean, she took to it right away. So I recommend gather the family around the hearth and watch Perfect Strangers together.
Now, I think one of the things that we're really missing in America today is the opening theme songs that these shows had. And I don't remember what it was.
Oh, look, the reason why this came up is because I sing that song every morning when they drive off to school. If I'm not in the car with them.
Help me out with it then.
Standing tall on the wings of my dream.
Okay.
Rise and fall.
Cousin Larry.
Cousin Larry.
Sort of a montage, right?
Right.
The one cousin is in Uzbekistan or wherever.
Well, they made him country of Meepos.
Okay,
Meepos. And then Meepos, he comes to Chicago unexpectedly, barges in. They live together. Hilarity ensues.
We watch the old Andy Griffith Show episodes.
Those are today, you watch them today.
I watch them with my boys.
Now, do your boys actually like it?
Well, that's really neither here nor there, Bill. They like the ones with Ernest T. Bass.
I never was an Andy Griffith fan, I gotta say.
Ernest T. Bass is this crazy mountain man who is really over the top funny. So we watch those. But I think my older boy, like your older girl, has a propensity for comedy. And I was just working with him on his developing accents. Not that I'm good at impersonating anybody, but
we've seen William Shatner, so we know.
Yeah, but if you can do that, if you're the guy I used to work with a guy named Gary Kobe, who's still. The last time I saw him, he was at the RNC. Who could we worked at townhall.com together, and he had an impersonation for every single person there, and it was awesome. If you can do good impersonation, so I was working with my boy on a Southern accent, which would be very offensive if we were to videotape it and show it, so I won't. But but I think he likes the comedy stuff, so we'll see where that goes.
And we have a lot to talk about. Can't talk about Perfect Strangers all day as much as I would like to. We might start a separate Perfect Strangers podcast. I
think we should have a show that is not Perfect Strangers, but where we just talk about this stuff. That doesn't even. I know Bob Wright watches this religiously. Let's ask him. What do you like? Is there a market for just Bill and Matt? And I don't know, we would call it like the green room or behind. When you pay for the premium podcast, you get the behind the scenes. But I don't know if people like this or not. They may hate this. I don't know. This is how we start every show. This is our foreplay. But I don't know if people like it or not. So
anyway,
you can tell I'm in New York, by the way, if you've heard the numerous sirens blaring as I do this. DC, we can all agree, is a superior city.
Or crime free. It's a paradise, tranquility in DC.
As Mayor Barry said, it may be the murder capital of the world, but not for strangers. It's only people who know each other. So, okay.
So your home state of Virginia, the political world.
Is it my home state?
Is now, right?
Well, do you call where you live your home state, or is your home state where you're from?
I think it can be applied to either situation. It is your adopted home.
Adopted homes. Okay.
I didn't think you were planning to abandon your roots.
Well, I just want the record to show that I'm from Maryland. I'm proud.
Okay. All right.
But I live in Virginia.
Apparently, you're embarrassed by your state these days.
Well, Maryland actually has a Republican governor.
So, so not only did the Democrats win, it was a sweep. Northam outperformed the polls. There's always talk that Democrats always underperform in the polls in Virginia. Opposite was true this time. Although I gotta say, David Byler, who's jumped from Real Clear Politics, the Weekly Standard, he had a piece ahead of time saying, polls have been off in both directions in Virginia over the course of the years, cutting against some of the other commentary that I saw leading up to Election Day. And
there was that Quinnipiac poll showing Northam up 17 points 2 weeks ago. So, I mean, that one was bound to move, right?
Right.
That was going to tighten.
So in the aftermath of this, there has been tons of internal debate within both parties about what the meaning of the results are. I have my own piece that was up Tuesday night, which is the Democratic Circular Firing Squad dodged a bullet. Because for those who weren't following the race too closely, I mean, everything was getting dumped on Northam in the last 2 weeks. Gillespie could not have had a better final 2 weeks.
Let me just say this too, Bill. Gillespie could not have had a better weather day. Election, I don't know if rain matters, but if it does, Election Day was one of the worst weather. I mean, it was pouring down rain in Northern Virginia, which is presumably the liberal base.
But it was like just Northern Virginia, right? It wasn't raining on the conservative side of the state, right?
That's what I think. But it was. I can guarantee you that it was pouring. Virginia is a bigger state than people think. I mean, geographically, it was pouring in Northern Virginia. It was cold. It caused major traffic problems. And it was a cold rain. It was dark at 5 o'clock, of course, because the time change just happened. So, I mean, if weather matters, it had to depress turnout in Northern Virginia, which is saying a lot because turnout was up. So I just wonder, what would Northam have won by if it was sunny?
It probably wouldn't have made a difference. I mean, this was a pretty – well, I'll say this. There's a lot of talk about sort of this being massive turnout for Democrats. I checked, because a lot of that's relative to other gubernatorial years,
right?
Where turnout probably was sort of up on both sides, but better for Democrats. I have been looking at turnout shifts all year relative to 2016. And you would expect there to be drops from 2016 because it was a presidential year, but I want to see the relative drops on the Democratic and Republican sides. And in the House specials of the last 4 House specials we had, even though Republicans won all those races, the Republican drop was bigger than the Democratic drop. They just were in Republican areas, and so they could weather that drop. In Virginia, the Republican and Democratic drops were about the same. A little bit worse for Republicans, but barely. So this was a race that I think was really fought along essentially the same lines as 2016.
You could make, you could make an argument. It's hard to make this argument because of the magnitude of the loss, the down ballot especially. But you could certainly argue, look, Gillespie lost. Of course he lost because, number one, there's this tradition or historical pattern in Virginia where whatever party wins the White House the next year, Virginia corrects and elects a governor of the opposite party. And it's no longer even a purple state. It's a blue state. 5 out of the last 6 governors have been Democrats. Donald Trump lost Virginia by 5 points.
Both senators are Democrats.
But,
and even this flipping of the House of Delegates, just as with a lot of state legislatures across the country, state legislatures are always the last to move. When there are these demographic long-term shifts, state legislators flip at the end. The seats that Democrats won were areas that Clinton won in. And they're finally coming around to becoming full-blown Democrats up and down the ballot.
Sorry, go
on.
Well, as I say, you could argue that this is not alarming. It shouldn't be that alarming because Trump managed to win the White House, but he lost Virginia by 5 points. But this isn't that alarming. I do think, though, and you could also say, look, Barack Obama's right after he's elected, Virginia elects Bob McDonnell, New Jersey elects Chris Christie, so this is to be expected. All that is true, but I just think it's safer to worry, if you're Republicans, because what this suggests to me is the trend of college educated suburban folk not Trump is toxic to them, and what are the ramifications of that as demography shifts in places like Arizona and Texas and Nevada.
Right. So from the Republican standpoint, to the extent you feel that the Republican base needs to be broader than the base that Trump won with. Trump won as a minority president. He did not do well in suburbs, did not do well with non-whites, did not do well with college-educated Americans. Virginia leans, this is a state that's 1/3 non-white, highly educated, dominated by D.C. suburbs. Clearly, the Trump base is not on the move. It's where it was at best in 2016. So that debate, I think, continues on the right. Do we need to go beyond Trumpism going forward, or do we just stick with what we have?
And then, as you very astutely pointed out, Northam was a unoffensive candidate. I mean, he was a pretty moderate.
Well, he's definitely. I mean, there's a bit of debate about this. I mean, on one hand, Northam is not as moderate as past Virginia moderates. He adopted, $15 minimum wage. He's for free college. He's very strong on gun control. Certainly much stronger than Mark Warner was on gun control when he ran for governor and Senate. But Northam did not follow the left on opposing natural gas pipelines. He did not follow the left on proposing a lot of government spending. He said he was going to be. He said he was going for fiscal responsibility. And most stark, this is right after we talked about the race last week, when Northam's been hammered by Gillespie on immigration, saying he was going to let MS-13 run wild in the streets. Also McAuliffe engaged in very expansive voter reform in unilaterally restoring voting rights to ex-felons, which don't happen automatically in Virginia. The governor can do it individually. He did it case by case 165,000 times. And there was one case where a convicted pedophile was released, got his voting rights back, then was convicted shortly thereafter and lost them all over again. But the Gillespie ad was Ralph Northam supported this pedophile getting his voting rights back. So he was getting hit on both those fronts. But specifically to immigration, Northam responded to all this pressure on top of this ad that we talked about last week, this by Latino Victory Fund, which depicted a white guy in a pickup truck chasing children of color through the streets of Virginia, Northam backs off of his past vote on sanctuary cities. As lieutenant governor, he voted to say, we're not going to ban cities from declaring themselves sanctuaries. He then says, I only did that because there are no sanctuary cities in Virginia. If there was one or someone was trying to be one, I would sign that law into effect. This angers the progressive left. Democracy for America announces we're pulling out of this race. We're not going to be part of a disastrous, racist, voter-depressing turnout campaign. And there's a separate incident before then where his running mate, Justin Fairfax, is African-American. He opposes these natural gas pipelines. A labor union...
So not just to be, so people know, in Virginia, they don't run as a ticket.
Right. They're independent,
so
yes.
He's on the ballot by himself, but they're obviously... I mean, they run as a ticket, but it's not like you vote for the president and you get the vice president together.
Right. So this labor union calls the Northam campaign, hey, can you give us some flyers that don't have Fairfax? We haven't endorsed him. It's a small number of the overall number of flyers the Northam campaign makes, but people recognize, hey, you got a set of flyers here that erase your African-American ticket mate. That's not cool. And Doug Wilder, the former governor of Virginia, who's African-American, he publicly chastises Northam for that, doesn't endorse Northam, and Democracy of America, raises that all over again, and it's announced that that's pulling out. A black Republican outfit led by Michael Steele runs an ad saying, how dare Ralph Northam throw African-Americans under the bus and throw Justin Fairfax under the bus. So all this is going on the last couple weeks of the campaign. And yet he wins. He outperforms the polls. So why is that? And we're seeing now a lot of folks on the activist left saying, we did this. We generated the turnout. We got Democratic Socialists elected to the House of Delegates, knocking off the House Majority Whip. We got the first transgender state legislature elected in America. And I'm not saying that DFA was the only team. Wasn't the entire left. Other folks stayed on the field when they left. But you can't pretend that Northam didn't do the things that he did. I mean, his final set of ads were not hard left, did not talk about immigration, avoided the culture war as much as possible, hit Trump on health care and the environment and school funding. He praised McAuliffe's economic record, says he wanted to focus on jobs and vocational training and expanding health care. Had a slight reference in one ad to Trump dividing America, but didn't say exactly on what grounds. And when he responded to Gillespie's ads about immigration and voting rights, his response was, I supported tougher sentences for gangs and cracking down on sexual predators. He didn't give a wholehearted liberal immigration message in the final days. So you certainly can debate, which elements of this are more relevant and more impactful on the final outcome. But you can't pretend that what Northam did didn't happen.
Yeah.
And I see folks...
I see it as being part of sort of working in tandem. So you've got Donald Trump, who's driving turnout amongst the left, driving them insane, getting the activists out to stop Trump. And then but simultaneously you have a Democratic candidate who is pretty non-offensive, non-threatening, and reassuring.
Right. His whole persona was very genteel. Yeah. This was not a fire and brimstone candidate. It's like, I'm your friendly country pediatrician here to heal our wounds.
Not only did he vote for George Bush, I think he looks like George W. Bush.
And he's got a little drawl.
Yeah.
I mean, he voted for Bush twice. It wasn't like I made a mistake. And apparently back then he even thought about switching parties. So this is not a guy in his bones who is, a fire and brimstone populist Democrat. But and I'm seeing now folks on, I don't want to paint a broad brush, but I have come across this in my direct dealings with people who will say, it's Democrats' fault we lost 2016. Hillary was too moderate and too close to corporations, and she didn't oppose fracking, and that kind of dry, wonkish candidate that can't defeat Trumpism. We need the real deal. We need more Bernies, and then Rob Quist lost and Zephyr Teachout lost and Russ Feingold lost. Oh, well, that's because the Democratic establishment weighed them down. They're tied to this awful party. They lost thousands of seats in 2010 and 2014. This thing's right from top to bottom. Now Ralph Northam wins, and all of a sudden, we did this. We solved all the problems. Rob Quist loses and Northam wins, and both times that the establishment sucks and the activist left did everything right. And I'm not arguing that the opposite is true, that the establishment is perfect and the activists are terrible. I mean, the evidence to me here is when both factions put it all aside and just showed up, then you win. In a state that tilts blue. So I can't say with certainty like that Northam had to flip-flop on sanctuary cities to win. Very possibly he didn't have to do that. But he might have felt, look, there are people out there that aren't totally with the left on that issue or aren't totally with the left on the gas pipelines. I need to speak to them too, while also making sure that our base turnout is at full tilt. And thank you to those activists that helped with that. Jesse Jackson once said you need both wings to fly. That's what happened here. That to me is the big takeaway. But of course, everyone wants to claim full credit.
Well, and I mean, if you compare it to Hillary, I mean, one, you could argue she was just a uniquely bad candidate because of the baggage. So it wasn't that she was too moderate. It was just that she had part of the swamp, the dynasty thing. I think you could also argue that, she was counting on Trump to drive turnout for her. And maybe that was a bad calculation before Trump was elected. But now that he's been president, and maybe he's more toxic now. He's more likely to drive turnout among the left now that he's president. You could also argue, look, maybe Hillary won. I mean, Hillary did win the popular vote last time, and so maybe the only way Trumpism wins is when the electoral vote matters.
Right. And we still from any of these 2017 elections, the House specials, the gubernatorial races, the mayoral races that happened this Tuesday, there's not a lot for us to go on that tells us who is going to win in 2018 and 2020 in the swing areas. I mean, for 2018, I mean, there are a number of Republican seats in these, upscale, diverse, college-educated districts. Those folks got to be pretty terrified. But there's also Democrats who are incumbents in Trump-leading areas.
Like if this was the governor's race of Ohio instead of Virginia, does Gillespie win?
Does Sherrod Brown win? Sherrod Brown's up in Ohio. We have 10 senators, Democratic senators, running in Trump states.
The other sort of theory is just like Barack Obama he had to be on the ballot to have coattails. Is that right? Is that the right word? Coattails?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes simple words is like, that doesn't sound right. That sounds weird. Coattails.
I heard somebody argue that in Virginia that there were reverse coattails, that the down ballot races lifted up Northam, which doesn't wash for me. Northam did a little bit better than Justin Fairfax and the AG Mark Herring. So I don't get the strong evidence that Northam was somehow have a drag.
I think they were going even more like grassroots, like the delegates. People were coming to vote for a delegate in a given area, and while they were there, they were voting the ticket. I mean, that doesn't seem very plausible to me, but I think that was part of the argument. But so just like Barack Obama only had coattails like when he was literally on the ballot, he had horrible midterms. And it could be that Trumpism and that Republican turnout isn't going to happen unless Trump's on the ballot as well.
Well, I would think that in 2018, you can't, Trump just hovers over everything. It's going to be very hard to localize your race. I mean, you would expect for Virginia that, a governor's race, why would you talk about Trump? What does Trump have to do with your state? What does Trump have to do with helping your commute? You're the transgender candidate that won, Danica Roem. I saw an ad that was put out for her by a friendly PAC. Her main message was, we need to improve traffic congestion so kids can get picked up at school on time. And her lawn signs were fix Route 28 now. That's what you'd expect from a local or state race. But there's a certain expectation of, like, where do you stand on Trump? I need to know that before I vote for you. You can't totally avoid it, which, whether it helps or hurts which party is a little hard to say, because in the national sense, Trump's unpopular. But race by race, that might not necessarily be a boon for Democrats, depending on exactly where things stand a year from now.
Yeah. What else you got?
Well, the tax debate looms large here, because you have Republicans who believe that the way out of this mess is to produce something of tangible benefit to people, to say, hey, at least we're governing here.
That's so old-fashioned thinking.
And I'm writing a piece that's going to push back on that, but I don't want to get into it just yet. I'm going to just tease it. Hopefully it'll be published by the time we talk next. But for our purposes today, that is the going conventional wisdom amongst Republicans. Okay. We need to do this.
Lindsey Graham famously said that if Republicans don't do that, it's all over for them, or something.
He said, well, now when we lose the Congress, and we'll cease with the Republican Party as we know it. This is the lone unifying principle of the party. And this is bumping up against some hard realities. One, that you got at least a handful of senators on the Republican side saying, if this is going to bust the budget, I'm not for it. We might be the party of tax cuts, but we're also the party of balanced budgets, and we can't. And sure, you can do your dynamic scoring. Yeah, I believe it's going to help with economic growth, but let's not take that too far and be ridiculous.
And we're also the party of life, and this, as of now, it doesn't defund Planned Parenthood, but it does. Social conservatives are up in arms over this. Gets rid of a tax credit for adoption.
Yeah, this that's a piece of a larger problem that the bill has, which is it's trying to simplify the code by getting rid of various deductions in exchange for a more generous standard deduction. So right now, when you fill out your taxes, you either take the standard deduction or you itemize. I have a mortgage tax deduction, I have a student loan deduction, I have medical expense deductions. I'm going to get more out of that than the standard, so I'll choose the itemized. This wants to get rid of most of the itemizing and just get a nice standard deduction, which probably will help some people. But if you are someone who gets a lot out of the itemized deductions, it might be a net negative for you. And it brings out those.
It also gets, it's more libertarian in the sense that it gets rid of what might be considered social engineering.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's conservative social engineering, right?
It's a conflict between social conservatives and libertarians.
Yeah. And the Weekly Standard has demonstrated that it's actually stupid, because the cost of keeping a kid in an orphanage by far exceeds the cost, I use it with quotes, of giving an adoptive parent this tax cut or this tax deduction. And so not only is it better for a kid, presumably, to be with a family, but it's actually costs more not to do that.
And I could see the Republican Party saying, okay, we can't get our pro-life voters mad at us. They're a bedrock pillar of our coalition. This is not a big money raiser for us. So, okay, we'll make an exception here. Well, if you're making an exception there, the big one out of all these itemized deductions is the mortgage interest reduction, which I don't think is being eliminated, but they're trying to cap it.
Right. I would argue you can't. They're going to. So you're making the point, which is give them an inch, they'll take a foot. Right. Yeah. If we start making exceptions, we'll never. Everybody's going to have their pet project, their pet loophole. But I would say this: then you got to get rid of the entire mortgage deduction. If that's going to be we're going to take a hard line stance. None of these deductions. You can't have this cap on the mortgage interest deduction.
Well, so they go halfway in the mortgage interest deduction, because basically they're trying to say if you're wealthy, you have a big home, you're getting more than $500,000 off of it. Then those homes shouldn't have the deduction for. But if you have a smaller home, a starter home, you have more modest means, you still get it, which is still a form of social engineering. It's not pure.
I wouldn't even say a starter home. In a lot of places in this country, you can get a lot of home for a couple $100,000.
Sure. So it's sold as essentially a class-based argument by Republicans, although I think there's some Democrats who are also sympathetic to that. You have the National Association of Home Builders, which is one of your more powerful lobbies because they are everywhere. They're in every community. And their message is not, let's help wealthy homeowners. It's, you're hurting a business in your community that's important for the entire community. If we're not building homes here, if we can't build homes, our cities can't grow, can't expand our municipal tax base, our property tax base, this is going to drag us all down. They are already in outright opposition to the bill. And if Republicans cave on adoption, and they feel pressure to cave on mortgage interest, well, now you're butting into a big problem in keeping the net cost of your tax bill low enough to stay within the bounds of reconciliation, because they have a certain cap they decided out of the budget resolution. But you also have to hold on to Corker, McCain, Susan Collins, maybe others who say, I don't want a budget busting bill here. So
I think it's also just a death by 1,000 cuts. Remember the first time they tried to repeal Obamacare, that first bill that didn't pass the House? They kept trying to cut deals. Remember that?
Yeah.
And once they signaled that they were willing to negotiate with terrorists to use a dangerous analogy,
right.
Once they demonstrated that, then everybody wanted something, and then every time you picked up a moderate, you lost a conservative. Every time you picked up a conservative, you lost a moderate. And it just, again, death by 1,000 cuts.
That only works if everybody gets candy. If everybody gets a piece, you might shut up about X, Y, or Z. The 1986 tax reform was a wholly bipartisan effort. So whatever awkward compromises were involved in the process of lowering rates and closing loopholes, we're all doing it. We're all involved here. So there's no incentive to take a pot shot at somebody. Now I don't want to discount the possibility that Trump can get some Democrats on board. He's talking to them. They certainly seem to know that they don't have a lot of cushion. And we saw with the Bush tax cuts, I mean, the message to a Democrat saying, hey, you don't want to go into your reelection campaign being against tax cuts. That's not an insignificant argument to make. But if Republicans can't get their own house in order, they can't come to unity amongst themselves, and you can't even get a bill to the floor, well, then a Democrat might say, look, I'm not opposing tax cuts. I'm keeping my mouth shut while you guys fight amongst yourselves, and I'm not going to get any trouble.
This really seems like it could be a replay of healthcare, what happened to Republicans on healthcare, where anytime you try to change something that people have a vested interest in, even if you're changing it overall for the better, there will be winners and losers. And the losers are going to be very vocal about being losers. And in this media environment, that gets amplified. And all of a sudden now you're against adoption. You know,
if you're going to do a winners and losers type of reform, which a lot of reforms are, there's always trade-offs in life. If it's not done in a bipartisan fashion, you're asking for trouble. And the only reason why Democrats got a healthcare reform through in that way was because they had the votes. They had a 60-seat majority in the Senate.
And I think that Republicans, are still psychologically wounded by how Obama pushed that through, and that that was had such a profound psychic impact on Republicans that explains why they've attempted to do everything via reconciliation, and with sort of predictable results.
But I mean, it should make it easier, of course. I mean, you're lowering your threshold of success. I mean, Obama needed 64 for Obamacare, and this this is only 50. But they as the repeal effort showed, they don't have a hard 50. So it still requires some compromise. And once you get into the compromising with revenue offsets, you are bound to pit one corporation against another. You don't have unanimity amongst corporations here, because some people take advantage of certain loopholes and not others. And you just don't have any kind of unified front.
I also think there's like a psychological effect here, is like if the other side of the aisle is in the game, they're the enemy or the adversary, and there's more of an incentive to stick together. But once you take them out, then the incentives seem to shift, and you're like, well, maybe I can get a better deal. They really need me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, I'd have to think this through, but it seems like there's something at play there. So smarter people than me, let me know in the comments if you agree.
One other tax point I want to make, because I think there is this divide between the budget hawks and the tax cutters. There's also a divide between the economic nationalists and the free traders. So you have a provision in this bill that slaps a tax on multinational corporations when they move money back and forth between subsidiaries, which they do all the time. So everything that money moves, they get a tax slapped on it. So that's pretty punitive. They get that unless they subject their foreign subsidiaries' revenue to U.S. tax law. And that's the kind of thing where, you know, a lot of Democrats might say, "Hey, great, you know, let's crack down on these tax cheats."
Well, the funny thing about that is doesn't that go against the premise of the repatriation that they're also doing?
Well, I mean, if you do it in combination with a low tax rate for multinationals to repatriate their cash, maybe you can argue, hey, you're getting a sweet deal out of this. But and I believe a lot of folks are still poring over the details. I'm sure things can be modified over time. But the initial reaction that Americans for Prosperity had, this is the Koch brothers political arm, they said this risks derailing the tax process. You're making it. This will get passed down to consumers, like the border adjustment tax proposal, which you floated and which we helped kill.
Right.
So we're warning you, this can't stay, because the repatriation, okay, you have a one-time discount or a total discount on your subsidiary income, but you're saying every time you move money around, well, if it was a permanent low tax rate on offshore income, maybe that would be satisfactory, because then you're not moving the money back and forth as much anymore. That's a better deal. But if you're giving it that big a tax cut, well, you're now taking less money. That might affect your ability
this
to.
Seems like a mess.
Well, tax reform's a mess. Who thought tax reform was going to?
Who knew it would be this hard?
I mean, there are people that said, "Oh, we're going to move to tax reform. It's going to be so much easier than healthcare. We all love cutting taxes. It's going to be easy."
Oh boy. Well, the good news for us is lots to talk about.
But the downside is it's about tax reform, which
the downside is we have to figure out what pass-through income means. But otherwise, it's good for business here. So
I know you were on CNN earlier today. I didn't get a chance to watch you, but one last thing before we go.
Well, let me just say what I said real quick, because Gary Cohn, the top economist in the Trump administration, referred to this tax reform as, quote, trickle-down economics, and said CEOs ought to love it. So
I mean, that seems super off message, because I mean, one of the fault lines here is you got some Republican voters who, in the Pew Research typology that came out a few weeks ago, are market skeptics. They're with Trump on immigration.
Yeah.
But they want higher taxes on corporations and wealthy people. And you see Republicans reacting to that. Oh, we're going to leave the top tax rate on millionaires. Donald Trump's telling Democrats, oh, I talked to my accountant. I'm going to get killed in this bill. This is no good for rich people. The state tax bill, that's just a little sop because we're going to get hit so hard. The message is being that this is good for the middle class and not a big giveaway to corporations. Here comes Gary Cohn, totally going off message. Tell him to making the
one of the
Kinsley
stupidest things I've ever heard. I have no idea what he's thinking. It doesn't make any sense to
Unless
me.
this is a super long con, the Democratic plant designed to screw the whole Trump administration.
Maybe something will come out. Maybe it's out of context. I'm sure it is, but it's still a stupid thing to say in any context. But we'll see what comes out.
But did you talk about China on CNN today?
Amazingly, I did not.
Oh, okay. So I thought that was the plan. I was going to ask you your China thoughts.
The plan, but we did not get to China.
Well, quickly, since I know it's on your mind, Trump made some waves early in the morning. I think overnight, American time, saying that he doesn't blame China for screwing us on trade. They're just looking out for their people. Is it at the same time this comes out? There's a profile in Politico by Michael Cruz. You might think how many more profiles of the Trump voter does one have to read in one's life? But this was a particularly good one in Johnson, Pennsylvania, showing how you can tell a Trump voter to his or her face, he hasn't built the wall. I don't care. I didn't want the wall anyway. But Trump says, keep him out. That's what I care about. Mm-hmm. The jobs are coming back. Well, that's not his fault. Congress is a mess. Anything you throw at them, they make an excuse. They just like Trump. They like the way he talks, the way he walks, the message that he sends. They don't seem to care that the policy isn't there. So when Trump says, I don't blame China for the trade deficit, does that mean, once again, his voters don't care? Or are there some, maybe not everybody, but enough people? Steve Bannon said on his way out of the White House that we're in economic war with China. We need to focus this like a maniac. And here's Trump now sucking up to them like every other president does once he gets into office. Is there any repercussion for that?
No. No, there's not. They like him and they trust him. And they have essentially outsourced they've just decided he's our guy. We trust him. And then they listen to Rush Limbaugh and watch Fox News. They're not encountering any opposing viewpoint on that. And once you just I don't need to check into this. I don't need to really think about it independently. This is my guy. He's right. That's where they are. It would be really hard. Remember, these are what we call Fifth Avenue Republicans, or Fifth Avenue Trump supporters, right?
Right.
It's going to take a lot for that 35% or whatever it is to believe him.
We talk a lot about how this is Trump's polling has been pretty terrible. He's been mired in the mid-30s in most polls. Worst for any first-year president. No first-year president ever been this low. All true, but other presidents have gone below 30. Bush went below 30. Nixon went below 30. Trump went below 30. Truman went below 30. Carter
Truman
went below 30.
I think Truman is the lowest.
Yeah.
At least at this point in his term.
Truman bottomed out later on, I believe, with Korea.
Okay. Well, whatever it is, I think. Am I right? I believe Truman is actually the lowest.
I think the lowest ever, but at this point in the term, Trump is the lowest.
Okay.
Trump's gone down farthest the fastest, but second-term presidents have hit, low 20s before.
Yeah, but by the way, Truman ends up getting reelected after he's the lowest.
Well, I think he was in the 20s after reelection. That's because the Korean War was after that. And he wasn't great. He wasn't in super great shape in the first term, but I don't think he went that low.
I'll always defer to you on history. So
I'm happy to double check it. I don't think he hit 20. I don't think
I'm thinking this is right before the 1948 miraculous election. But anyway.
But it does stand to. It is worth pausing to say, you know what, this isn't a total bottoming out. We have seen worse in history, and it is possible to recover. It is possible to get wayward people back in the folds because they're not saying today, I am approving of Trump, it's not the same as saying I am approving of Democrats and want to get rid of Trump. And Trump only won with 46%, so we don't know how much of that wayward Trump vote could potentially come back. And at minimum, all evidence seems to say there's a pretty hard floor for Trump in that low 30 period. It's hard to see what would make him go down because he's already been hit with almost every possible thing one could be hit with, and it hasn't budged yet.
Very good, my friend. Sadly, I have to bolt.
All right.
But I think this was another award-winning episode. I think the audience got their money's worth there.
Not enough Perfect Strangers talk. Next time, we'll do an episode by episode recap for the next show.
I would like to do instead of that, let's do like one on Silver Spoons, one on Give Me a Break, one on Sanford and Son. We could do 100. There's 100 of these shows I used to watch.
Absolutely. Till next week, sir.
All right. Check us out at DMZ Show, and we'll see you back here in the DMZ next week.
Take care.
Thanks.